So in my last market update, I said to you guys, I'm only going to do another market update when I have alpha for you. And today that is the case. There are tons of trade setups. I've just had a massive breakout on Bitcoin. I want to talk to you about what I think this means for Bitcoin. Is this potentially the beginning of a new bull market? Is the low in for the cycle? Why is Bitcoin running and why are stocks actually down? And what are the opportunities we're seeing across the market at the moment? So why did Bitcoin pump? Well, there are a few reasons, but the catalyst, at least in terms of a news event, was the fact that the US Treasurer, Scott Bessent, announced that the US government has started to buy back long-term bonds because the yields on long-dated bonds have started to go crazy. And that's basically because there hasn't been much demand, which is pushing yields up. This makes it more expensive for the government to borrow money, and they're incentivized to push it down, calm the bond market down, and essentially keep rates from rising further. But on this news, Bitcoin absolutely pumped. Pretty much it was announced here. There was already a bit of compression taking place. We already had the higher lows. We're already pushing into a resistance zone, but things have gone absolutely crazy. And if you look across the rest of the market, pretty much every other crypto is up alongside gold, which is also strongly up. And the reason for this is twofold. Assets like gold and Bitcoin don't pay yield, so they actually become more attractive propositions when yields drop. And there's been a bit of a narrative coming back about, US debasement and money printing. People have been calling this a form of stealth QE, which is, I guess, incorrect by definition, but maybe, correct slightly in terms of intent. And clearly that bodes well for the currency debasement kind of safe haven narrative of gold and Bitcoin. You might be wondering, why didn't equities pump? Isn't this good for equities because it makes equities more attractive versus parking money in US Treasury yields? And although that's true in isolation, I think the narrative really driving equities right now is more around, sticky inflation, more around concerns around CapEx, AI productivity, and the general slowdown in the semiconductor space. So I think that's capping equities for a while. I'm personally not expecting equities, to really rip and make new highs in the shorter term. I do think assets like gold, the broader crypto sector could actually shine in the meantime. I wouldn't necessarily be counting out equities from making new highs because, this is an extremely strong chart on the weekly. We've been tracking this upwards channel for the last year on equities, and it's just been going up and up and up. This is technically a breakout, but I do think on the 4-hour chart and on the daily chart, there is enough cause to just suggest that maybe, there's going to be a slight slowdown. But pivoting to Bitcoin, now that you know the reasons why it popped, I think the other factors at play were the fact there was, a lot of short interest in the market. Like if you actually look over the last 24 hours, there's been $1.5 billion of shorts getting squeezed. I mean, some were late longs, but the majority have been shorts. Over the past week, there's been multi-billions of dollars worth of shorts that have been liquidated. So I basically think, Bitcoin was just heavily oversold. You had the MicroStrategy, selling or Sailor Death Spiral narrative, You had, lots of people shorting. You had peak bearishness, but what's quite interesting is a lot of the headlines around that stuff, the headlines around Iran were happening during a time where Bitcoin was distributing, but it didn't make lower lows. So there was a lot of bearishness in this zone, a lot of bearish headlines. People were selling, and that was kind of capping price to the upside. But a lot of the sellers were actually flushed out during that zone. And then that's why you see with the first positive catalyst for the market, the market really explodes to the upside. And if we track it here and actually draw the resistance in on the H4, you can see it was a really clean flip and a really clean breakout. Now, often with these breakouts on Bitcoin, it doesn't often actually give you an opportunity to get in cleanly on a dip. I think one of the best ways to play breakout trading is wait for a macro structure shift like we actually got here, then try and, pull a long continuation on a lower time frame. So if you go down from the 4-hourly down to the 1-hourly, you can see, rally-based rally, which we discuss a lot on the channel as a breakout trend continuation strategy. At least, if you've been watching my channel a lot in the past, if you're a new user that maybe has come from some of my recent content around, AI trading, which I'm doing a lot more of now, then welcome to the channel. I've been doing discretionary stuff for years as well. And I also think it's really important to have a fundamental and discretionary read on the market if you're actually going to become a good AI trader, because, you still have to set the parameters. You still have to pick the tokens or, the stocks for you to actually trade. So I think when it comes to AI trading, having both skills is absolutely essential. But you can see on the lower time frame, we started to just pull back a little bit. This is kind of the base forming. And now you can see we're making a series of higher lows and higher highs. So pretty typical price action. When you get a breakout, you typically won't get the clean retest that maybe you want, and you kind of have to catch it on a lower time frame. And a really good strategy that I use is I use the noodle, which is the indicator available in the Mars High Club that we built to basically, chase trend continuation. So if you did miss the move, what you're really waiting for is the next base to form. Eventually there will be a slowdown. It might come in and you might get, a bit of a dip entry, and then there could be compression into 80. And then we need to see what happens past that. So that is kind of the short-term plan. I'll get into alt in a second, but I know a lot of you will be thinking longer term, like, does this mean the bottom is in? This is actually where I'm going to preach some caution, because objectively, although this is really encouraging, we haven't had a weekly close above the weekly noodle, which has pretty much been, and is in line with the bull market resistance or support band for Bitcoin. So you can see, it held all the way up in the prior rally, and then we broke to the downside. We flipped. We had a bearish rejection of this zone, and we've been basically making lower lows since, and we've been making lower highs as well. So technically, we haven't had a weekly close. I know there's a day to go now, so we might get it above this zone. Even if we did close the weekly above this zone, technically, we are heading into major resistance at 82K. And there have been times, in prior bear markets where Bitcoin will, come up, rally, and then fake out. So it is possible, if Bitcoin doesn't actually fully break structure, which would rely on a clean weekly close, ideally a multi-week close above 85 to kind of suggest, we're getting out of this, Bitcoin could actually reject here and then end up making a lower low, and that would technically be bear market structure. What I will say is that that's not my default case, or it doesn't really even, I don't even really need to have a full framework around it, because all I really need to do is go down to H4 and just play the momentum game. I'm just going to be tracking the trend. As long as the trend is good, as long as sentiment is good, as long as the narrative's intact, it's play on, I think, for the market. And as long as it's play on for the market, we can start looking at some opportunities in alts. This isn't saying, that we should get super excited that there's going to be a crazy Bitcoin bull again. This is just very simple level to level trading. This is just very simple momentum trading, and understanding after Bitcoin puts in a local high, it might cool off for a bit, and it might pave way for other assets to perform well. So very encouraging signs on Bitcoin. And that has kind of, renewed my interest, and I think a lot of other people's interest in the market. Now, we have actually kind of been positioning for this for a while. Like if you go into Mars High Club and you look at some of the recent watch lists, I've posted so many of them. I really spoke about the assets that I've been interested in the time. By the way, if you don't know, Mars High Club is my exclusive Discord community where I post all of my market analysis. We have analysts in there. We have alpha. That's where everything drops first when it comes to markets. I'll leave a link down below if you do want to check it out. But you can see here, we've been talking about hype and pump. This was 4 days ago before the pump. Been talking about assets like VVV, been talking about ETHFI. Basically, I was condensing my watch list down to assets that were performing well during the bear. Because if you want to look at assets that are going to perform well as the market shifts into bullish momentum, you essentially have to look at the assets which have had the best price action, best momentum, and best narrative during the bearish periods. And these are really assets that are exhibiting positive flows, that have been exhibiting strong narrative and strong mindshare flows. And these are the sorts of assets that, when the market does recover, tend to perform well. So I put together a small watch list today. Really, Bitcoin, ZEC, Pump, ENA, VVV, ETHFI. There are a few more, and I think if this does expand, there could be rotation to other assets. But I feel like these are the main ones right now. And Hyperliquid's been another one that I should add, because this is actually my biggest altcoin holding overall. This is a nice asset. I've actually got a trade set up on that I'm going to show you in a second. This is basically my biggest altcoin holding right now, alongside Bitcoin. I hold some Zcash. I hold some VVV. I didn't really get back big into ENA, but there actually is a trade set up for me now, which I'll show you. And we'll get into, if you have missed this move and if you've been, sidelined from the crypto markets, what you can look at doing. I will just say, you don't really need to FOMO. You don't really need to panic. I actually think it's a good thing, even if you're sidelined from the market. You want to see Bitcoin performing well. You want to see volatility coming back into crypto, because that's what's going to bring people back in. And if you look at the Bitcoin ETF flows, all it took was a pump to actually have over $1.1 billion pile in through the ETF. So people always assume that narrative is actually what leads price action. And although there can certainly be announcements that catalyze price action, I do think ultimately people look for reasons to justify price, with the creation of a narrative. So I feel like the safe haven narrative, although there is merit to it, it is being created off the back of price action, which is largely, in my opinion, due to a short squeeze and just a lot of the sell pressure being flushed out. It's probably going to come out that Saylor's been buying as well. Because if you actually look at the US 30 year, yes, they did have a dip on the announcement, but we've started to see prices starting to rebound a little bit across, a variety of US treasuries. So, yes, it did kind of signal to the market they will continue to buy back bonds. I don't think it's meaningful enough to impact equities, and it may not even be meaningful enough to, materially impact Bitcoin or gold, but it does make them slightly more attractive, and it thrusts attention back onto these assets, particularly Bitcoin, which has just been starved of attention, and that came at a time where a lot of people were flushed out, and it leads to a big squeeze. So moving on from Bitcoin, what trades could we potentially look at? And I'll, keep you guys updated on this channel, so make sure you turn notifications on when I think there's another big opportunity. A Hyperliquid's one that, obviously I've got a big spot position of this, but probably the next trade on Hype that I'm really looking for is a similar trade to the Bitcoin trade that I talked about before. Like if for some reason we did get, an aggressive squeeze to the upside, I think you could wait for a breakout and then potentially play long continuation on Hyperliquid, basically longing your longs type strategy if we actually went into price discovery territory, because this is the kind of asset that, it's been mentioned by, the Trump administration. It's a massive asset. It's pretty much the epitome of, a revenue generating protocol in crypto. It's, in my opinion, the best altcoin in crypto. Yes, the valuation also appeals to that. But, when attention comes back into the market, the quality is really concentrated. Like you don't need to go too far down the risk curve to try and, find good opportunities. The market will mainly just concentrate into the strongest opportunities. Clearly Hype's one. So even if, you haven't been in position, if you haven't been, keeping up to date in the Discord with some of the posts we've done about it for, many, many, many months when price action was choppy and boring, then I do think there could potentially be a breakout trade on the horizon. It's one to keep in mind. Another one I'm keeping in mind for a similar trade is Zcash. This has also moved up quite nicely. I do have a Zcash position. Honestly, a regret that I have is not buying more on the lows. This was a complete FUD-storm, complete capitulation, but it's shown extreme resilience. And the fact it's shown extreme resilience in the face of adversity and in the face of bearish, macro price action for crypto as a broader asset class, this suggests to me that ZEC, actually does have the legs potentially to be one of the strongest performing assets in a bullish period. Now, once again, not saying ape into resistance, but there definitely could be a breakout trade here. Conversely, if you want to move down into, the 4 hour or the 1 hour, you could look at long continuation on an asset like Zcash as well. Pump Fund, another one that we're going to talk about. This actually did flip the 0.002 level a couple of weeks ago. This was like the first big reversal, but it's just continued to go higher. Once again, more of an asset, there's less of a breakout structure on this because it's now facing heavy resistance, but it's more of an asset that I think, has really clean price action. Like if you get rid of all the lines here, it's basically in a pretty nice uptrend. So any major pullbacks, if you want to invalidate below the previous low, could be something to look at on Pump Fund. I think the narrative overall for Pump is quite strong. Now, one that I actually posted about earlier today in the Discord that's just kept ripping higher since is actually ENA. It just keeps exploding. It just keeps pumping. If you actually look at the daily, or even better, if you look at the weekly chart, you can see there is a big reversal taking place. So this actually makes me quite bullish if you look at the weekly, because it's just breaking out now, but technically it's into resistance. But if you look at the daily, you take the wick low here, you draw it across, and you look at where price rejected. You can see that we've actually broken through major resistance here. So on the daily, we've broken through resistance. I do expect, because of the fact that we're heading into greater resistance on the weekly, that maybe we do see a pullback. Could potentially validate some opportunities on, daily or H4 if you do get a pullback into this red zone here, in conjunction with another thrust to the upside. You could potentially, long a breakout of the prior high. So that is something that I might consider. If you guys are wondering as well, like, Mars, how do you use AI for this? You can actually simply tell your AI, and I just usually do a voice transcript. I'm using Grok Bot for it at the moment. It's amazing. I basically just tell it, like, read my trading view. If price breaks out, on a defined level, let me know, alert me. And with ENA specifically, if we get a daily close, this sort of price action X, Y, and Z, then alert me. So pretty much, I don't need to be at my screen all day. I can kind of just spend 20 minutes in the morning working out what I want to do. I'm also relatively time poor. Like I spend maybe an hour researching per day, but I don't have the hours that I used to. I'm building a business. I'm, focused on AI. I'm creating content. I'm managing a big portfolio. I don't want to be sitting in front of the charts all day, but what I can do is use my market read to see where I would like an entry, and then I can use AI to augment, helping me actually get the entry. If you actually just give it access to your trading view, which it can because it has its own computer, it can actually give you alerts. So that is pretty cool. That's on Grokbot. Of course, you can manufacture a very, very similar thing with Claude and TradingView if you don't want to pay more for a subscription, but I thought I would mention that. So that's ENA. VVV is very interesting. It's just starting to break out. This is another protocol. This is in the AI space. So there's a good narrative crossover there that is also actively revenue generating. I think in terms of a trade setup here, you're really just looking at the H4 and you're looking for some sort of pullback into this zone, like maybe $14. Once again, long continuation. We're not talking about big spot longs. Probably for me personally, we're talking about lower size leverage longs. Big spot longs only come on major dips. So I'm sure there'll be another one. There always is. I don't think this is a runaway bull market, but something to keep in mind. There's also a chance, this rally gets rejected and we cool off for a couple of weeks and you also get a chance to enter spot position. So I don't think there's a chance to rush, because if we get breakouts, you're going to make money from, long continuation trading or breakout trading with lesser size, but you compensate with leverage typically and have an invalidation. And then if we do get a dip, no worries. You get a chance to replenish some spots. So I don't think there's a big issue here. I mean, you still have to keep in mind that, Bitcoin hasn't proven to have broken out technically from its structure. It would need to break 82 to actually break structure and officially signal to me that a bull market type environment could be back. I mean, realistically speaking though, for Bitcoin to get back to 120, it definitely could, and it could defy logic alongside gold. But I think the weakness from equities probably, and I know they haven't been that correlated, but typically Bitcoin only makes highs, during a real risk-on season. The fact that equities aren't exhibiting that strength and there's issues around capex, and I know Bitcoin has a different narrative, but I still think we've got to respect that unless equities are major risk on, it might be hard for Bitcoin to sustain flows. Very easy for this initial pump because you've had a big move, you've had a leverage squeeze, a lot of people that are sidelined are now getting interested again. There's probably enough juice to push this into the 80s, but I think to start sustaining into 90 to 100, that's going to be difficult to sustain that buy pressure. Who are the cohort of buyers? And also you're kind of relying on a lot of these people that have been underwater on their Bitcoin buys towards the top, not using that as an opportunity to take profits or de-risk. And I even know, a lot of big traders right now who are using this as a mini opportunity to de-risk, and I think that's also a valid approach, taking profits after a big pump. So that is something to be aware of, if you're targeting crazy numbers for Bitcoin. The other asset that I like at the moment that I've just been tracking is ETHFI. I think the numbers are very good. They've got a card that's doing extremely well, and you can see this is also in an uptrend. So the good thing about this market is that there aren't that many quality alts. There really aren't. So I feel like attention is really concentrated into select alts, which kind of makes it easy for you to trade. You're only really managing or watching a few positions. Just going through the list of what's performing today, I can give you some quick thoughts. Pudgy, I think it's a top meme coin. It's solid. Pepe as well, kind of been majorly beat down. It's up 40% this week. These are things to look at as major memes if the market does want to bid major memes. Clearly on-chain will do well, but that's a topic for another time. I actually like WorldCoin. I'd be very interested to actually chart WorldCoin, considering it has the Sam Altman, OpenAI connection. So let's actually go to the daily, see if there's any structure break. See, this is less bullish for me, although we did technically make a higher low. We didn't sweep the range low. This is a break in the shorter term. Obviously range high is your target, but it's not as bullish because you're heading into a bit of a resistance cluster here, and it still has a lot of overhead resistance, but potentially one to watch. I mean, as a swing, you could be looking at, a swing to the highs. It's still a big trade. And there's still a bit of a cup and handle pattern kind of forming here, but I think you want to wait and see whether it can actually sustain. What I would rather see is price grinding up. I'd rather see some evidence for a few days and then on a flush, maybe, look to get in and kind of ride it from there after a bit more proof, because if you want to draw in the resistance, we know we have this cluster here, which is acting as resistance, so you probably wouldn't want to ape into it right now. But I do think it's interesting. Near Protocol also has the AI narrative, Alt L1. Interesting. I don't think it has the flows, though, or the revenue to make it really compelling. These are the type of tokens I'm looking more so at the moment. That's why, things like Hyperliquid are doing well, things like VVV are doing well. It's because they're revenue generating. And there are a few other interesting things, but I don't feel like you need to go too far down the list. I think it's really about right now focusing on the major assets, doing a good job at risk managing and trading those assets, and then we can have a lot of fun as things start to unfold. I think this is really a market of all right, if some confidence gets back in for Bitcoin, clearly it's going to open up opportunities for the rest of the altcoin market. So other alts can definitely shine in an environment like that. And if, I have some alpha for you, I'll post it in Mars High Club first. So check it out if you want access to my stuff. Also access to Fabian's amazing commentary. I think he's guided everyone really well over the last few weeks. His commentary's been amazing. Morin's been absolutely crushing it. I know he's been hitting massive trades. Like, honestly, I'm not just saying this because he's an analyst in my group. If you follow him, you'll know he just has an incredible strike record. Like, was an incredible long trade on Ethereum. I actually should be copy trading him, and I shouldn't even be doing it. I could just get my Grok bot to copy trade him and have access to my exchange and read the Discord. And that's the cool thing you can do with AI now. Like, if you're in a Discord like ours and you want, discretionary alpha, you can plug it in and then be like, hey, instead of going through every chat in the Discord, hey, did any of the analysts post anything that I should look at today? And you can even run your AIs like that, which I think is really, really cool. Paradise, of course, Picasso, Surf, like everyone, has their niche there. And yeah, if you actually go into bragging rights, this is where people show off a little bit. We've had some pretty crazy ones. People smashing Bitcoin longs, Ondo longs, Ethereum longs. Obviously, that was Morin's trade that he shared in the group. This person said, thanks, Surf, Morin, and Paradise. I was flip-flopping on ETH, fumbled on hype. Still, obviously, did quite well. You can see other people printed off Paradise's calls. So the traders have been very, very, very good. And yeah, I think it's just been a very good community to be a part of, even in a bear market. I mean, you see, the second there is a little bit of bullishness, we're capitalizing. And Morin and Paradise actually hit the massive shorts on Bitcoin at 95k. So they've been crushing on both sides of the market. Really, I think that's the good thing about trading. You don't need to go in with a huge bias. All right, look, that's it for me today. Make sure to sub, turn notifications on. We got some bangers dropping soon on the AI markets front, but I'll also do market updates like today when I think stuff's unfolding. Just quickly see if anything is happening on gold. Bit of a breakout now on gold, actually. This is one of my longer term positions. I actually posted in the Discord a few times, also mentioned on the channel here. I was buying gold on the way down, 4,600, 4,400, 4,300, 4,000. So glad this is starting to do well now. And I think gold is setting up for another run to all-time highs. I really think it's a strong asset to be denominated in. Obviously, I'm more interested on pullbacks, but gold is an interesting one because longer term, there is kind of the bear case that AI productivity will just crush the margins so much on labor that the whole market becomes more productive. And in a society like that, you'd rather own risk assets, right? If productivity is booming, rather than, and inflation becomes less of a concern because gold's typically an inflation hedge. But there's also the scenario where that doesn't happen and there's mass currency debasement and, scarcity really becomes a factor. And that's where you probably want to hold gold. So I think just holding a mix of everything, gold, crypto, risk assets, and then trying to build a discretionary edge, and then multiplying that with your income is like ultimately the best way to reach financial freedom. But maybe a topic for another time. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a lovely rest of your day. Peace out.